Hey, I'm Haley.
And I'm Andrew.
And this is
Extension in the Kitchen. So today's episode is going to be all about summer produce. My name is Andrew Pfeiffer and I'm the horticulture agent here in Stanley County. So my specialties include home vegetable production, ornamentals, and fruit trees. Because of that, Haley invited me on the show today to talk about summer produce and how to get the best bang for your buck and the best flavor for your kitchen.
Yes, Andrew, like he said, he's our horticulture agent. So I really wanted him on the show to talk more about the growing process, the harvesting process. We have a lot of great produce that is in season right now here in Stanley County. And while I know a lot about cooking and nutrition, Andrew is our guy that we go to on growing things and the best time to pick things so that it's going to have the best flavor and be just absolute best to cook with, right?
Yes, ma'am. All right, so today we have a variety of fruits and vegetables that are typically considered summer produce. And so I'll go over things such as these melons, corn, peaches, pineapple, and peppers. All of these are typically going to be in season right now at your local farmer's market, as well as at their best at the grocery store. Typically, you don't want to buy any of this stuff during the wintertime as it tends to not be at its best. So, to start, let's talk about tomatoes. Now typically, an heirloom tomato like this one is going to be the pride and joy of any summer gardener and is in fact probably the most highly regarded summer vegetable and is the most common beginner choice. However, a lot of folks may make the mistake, if they harvest their tomatoes while they're green and let them ripen on the counter, they might get overripe and they might not know it. So a couple things to look for. A good quality heirloom tomato, if you're going to purchase one, is going to be relatively blemish free. So the skin's going to be nice and clean. There's not going to be any real huge cracks, no black spots. Another thing you're going to want to look out for is a uniform shape if you can get it. These typically tend to be easier to slice and have a little bit more consistency on the inside. And the biggest thing for ripeness, besides of course being red, this one being a little bit more purple, it's going to vary by variety. However, the biggest thing to look out for is the texture. An overripe tomato is going to almost squish in your hand. And in fact, you want to avoid that, and so you should check them daily if you have them ripening on your counter, because what you want is to just have enough give to where if you press down with your finger, anywhere on the surface of the tomato, it should give in to your touch, but not too much. If I can press in deep and the dent sticks, it's overripe. You either have to use it straight away, or it may not be any good to eat. If it's really firm, you can let it go for a couple more days to get maximum flavor and the best quality texture.
Awesome. So if we wanted to use some throughout the week, we might get different levels of softness, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So if you give yourself the opportunity and stagger them a little bit, say if I wanted to eat a BLT or a tomato sandwich every day of the week, I'm going to want to choose tomatoes at different stages of ripeness so that I don't have to eat them all in one day. For as much as people love tomatoes, most of us can't eat 2 or 3 heirlooms in a day, although I do know several people who might.
And as y'all may know, I do teach a lot of preservation and canning classes. So let's say that you are, growing and harvesting a lot of tomatoes. Come and learn from me and we can make some salsa together, some spaghetti sauce, all kinds of yummy stuff so that your good produce doesn't go to the waste. Okay, cool.
On the topic of other commonly grown summer produce is summer squash, such as zucchini and yellow squash. The biggest mistake a gardener might make with these is either planting too many of them or waiting too long to pick. So summer squash, unlike melons and winter squash like pumpkins, these should be harvested when they are young. This is about the correct size, so between 6 and 8 inches is ideal. This will have a thin skin, very few seeds, and be easy to work with. If you leave any of these on the plant too long, they will turn into a 3-foot monstrosity full of hard seeds and be completely inedible. You want to avoid that? It's best to pick early rather than late. You want to aim for a smaller size, and you want it to be nice and firm. You don't want it to be soft, you don't want any wrinkles anywhere. You want it to have a good overall texture. It shouldn't be easy to bend. That's so you know you're picking good quality summer squash that is quite fresh. If you grow it yourself, you will be having summer squash probably every day to every other day. So check your plants regularly. You might get too much by the end of the season. That is the summer gardener's curse. Your neighbors will get zucchini, and your neighbors' neighbors might get zucchini. It's all right. Donate to your local food bank or find ways to preserve it. There's plenty of recipes you can use to make use of the excess produce.
Yes, I actually made some zucchini and summer squash noodles just this week at the local farmers market. It was a great hit with adults and with youth. So if you have a hard time thinking of new fun recipes that you and your family can try together, please reach out to us, and I'm happy to share some great recipes with you too. But great tips.
Another beginner choice for the summertime are peppers. In this case, of course, I'm using bell peppers, which are going to be sweet. There's no heat at all involved here. However, something that a lot of folks may not be familiar with is that this green pepper and this red pepper are likely the same variety. Typically, when harvesting green peppers, these are simply the immature form. Because of that, they're going to have a significantly more bitter flavor, as this green signifies it's filled with chlorophyll, the green plant pigment that allows them to absorb the sun's rays and make their own food. When they start to ripen, the sugars mature inside the pepper, as well as a couple other compounds such as anthocyanins and antioxidants, things that are really nutritious. The vitamin C content goes up quite a bit in a red pepper like this one, and the flavor matures. However, you cannot pick a green pepper and expect it to turn red. This is called a non-climacteric fruit. Here's a fun little trivia word for the day. Essentially, it means that it is incapable of ripening once detached from the plant. And this does apply to several of the items we have here today. Because of that, it is very important that you pick it at the right time, because where it stops is where it's done. You won't get anything else out of them. This being said, you should also not attempt to save seeds from any green peppers. This applies to green bells, jalapenos, and several others. When they are green, the seeds are not mature, and so you're not going to really get any plants. However, a red pepper that is fully ripe has mature seeds. So if you want to save seeds for next year out of your garden, you have to let your peppers fully ripen on the plant. Because of that, a lot of folks may not get jalapeno seeds to save for next year because they accidentally just pick them all when they're green, since that is what we are used to.
So tell me how this works again. So the bell pepper that is picked the earliest is usually green,
Yes.
versus the bell pepper that's picked the latest is typically red, and somewhere in between are yellow and orange?
So it's actually a
Word.
difference in cultivar.
Okay.
So typically speaking, bell peppers can come in red, orange, and yellow, but there's also
Okay.
varieties that turn purple. However, each variety is going to ripen to its respective color. Once it has achieved that color all the way, it's time to pick. If you see a pepper that starts to have wrinkled skin and cracks in it, that one is starting to go bad, and I would not use it. These are also something that can be used to make roasted red peppers. You simply need to take the skin off by scorching it or steaming it, and you can process it further. However, a green pepper does not really hold up the same way, but the texture is significantly firmer, and so this is one of the best for fresh eating and often has a nice grassy bite to it.
Awesome. Okay, cool. What else do we have?
Well, it wouldn't be summertime without sweet corn. I'm from the Midwest, and so corn is extremely important to me. And the trick with picking good corn is without opening it, it's hard to tell how many kernels you have and if there's any bad spots. Because of this, I like to recommend checking the end of each stalk. At the top of the corn, this is called the silk. There used to be male flowers even taller than that called the tassel, and those are used during pollination. However, if pollination is not complete, you will be missing kernels, typically from the top end. What you can do is if you have one that's still fully covered, and typically I do recommend peeling the top part of the husk, is to feel around the top. If you feel a ridge, and there's one right here, there's a distinct ridge at the top, typically that's going to translate to a cob that is missing kernels at the top. That means you're going to have less corn for what you pay for. This is still perfectly edible and perfectly delicious. It just means that it was an incomplete fruit set. And so you want to avoid corn like this if you can. You want to select ones that have a full set. So unlike this first one, when I feel this one at the top, there's really no ridge. It ends abruptly, but it is still full and plump all the way at the top. And so when I pull the silk away, there's still some missing, and that's almost always the case. But comparatively,
right?
there's a lot more kernels here. You get more corn for your money. The kernels at the top are larger, and that's the other part about being incomplete. You may notice the ones at the tip here are a bit undersized. It's not as good quality. So aim for ones that have the nice full all the way to the top. They'll have nice big kernels. You're going to have great corn on the cob, and it can be used for any number of summer dishes. It's really probably some of my favorite summer produce.
Agreed.
One of the biggest produce issues people run into is selecting properly ripe melons. Melons are often harvested premature, and so they're not going to be nearly at their best. And an underripe melon is not going to be nearly as sweet. It's going to be a lot firmer, and honestly is not nearly as good of an experience. One of the most maligned melons is the honeydew. Unfortunately, a lot of folks have never had a properly ripe honeydew before, and so the name doesn't even really make sense when you have this green melon that is hard, bland, and typically doesn't have much to offer. This is an example of a honeydew that isn't really quite ripe yet. It is very, very shiny. There's a waxy coating, so when I rub the skin, it barely makes a sound. The other thing, if you smell it, Haley, you will find there's pretty much no scent at all.
Not much of a smell. Yeah,
That's
mine's not making that squeaky noise at all.
And so when I have this properly ripe honeydew, there will be a very sharp contrast when I rub the skin. It's going to sound much like I'm wiping down a glass window. Because of this, there is a waxy coating that is formed on the rind of an underripe melon that slowly disappears once it matures. Another difference side by side, this ripe one here is a darker yellow color. It's a little bit more even all the way around.
I want to smell it.
And there's a little bit of damage. Oftentimes, an ugly melon is actually a very good one. However, at least on honeydew, the squeak test and the smell test are the best ways to tell when it's at its best.
Oh yeah, completely different.
It should have
Smells
a
so good.
very sweet and somewhat floral aroma, similar to honey. That's really where it gets its name. If your honeydew smells like honey, it's going to be a really delicious option. So keep your eyes peeled at your supermarket, and most importantly, save your money if they don't seem too good. Your local farmer's market is likely going to have much higher quality ones, but you can still find a couple hidden gems in the giant pile at your local store. The other summer melon that's often a little bit tricky to work with is the cantaloupe or the rock melon. Cantaloupes are slightly more favored than honeydew given their orange flesh and even taste. And it can actually be a little bit harder to pick a good quality cantaloupe. A couple things to note. Cantaloupes, unlike a lot of produce, will actually detach themselves from the plant when they're fully ripe. Because of this, one should always look at the stem end of a cantaloupe and check and make sure if it is brown. If it is fully green on the stem end, that means it was cut off the plant, which means it may not have had as much time as it could have wanted to fully ripen. Another thing to look out for is this thing called a field spot right here. This simply indicates where it was allowed to sit on the ground. If you have one that is nice with a dark color, that typically means that the melon has had enough time to become ripe. Another thing to look out for is consistent webbing across. You don't want it to be lightly webbed. You don't want the webbing to be super shallow. You don't want this to be really shiny. You want this nice dull sheen with nice raised webbing all the way around. You want to look out for cracks and blemishes on the surface, which may indicate leaking sugar. And another test that you can do is press on the end. There should be ever so slightly a little bit of give when you put your thumb down on the rear end. Typically, that means it will be fully ripe. You can do the smell test, and this is honestly the one that I recommend. However, this particular batch, and it may be a cultivar thing, this was not very fragrant, and so I wouldn't rely on it fully.
Yeah, not as much of a smell as the fresh honeydew.
Not nearly. Still quite tasty though. And of course, there wouldn't be a hallmark produce item in summer if it wasn't for the humble watermelon. This, going from June all the way through to September, is perhaps the most favorite fruit of summertime. It really is the classic. However, picking a good watermelon can be a big challenge. There's a lot of conflicting information out there, and so I'll dispel a couple myths and give a few truths to picking a good quality watermelon for your summer barbecue. So, when looking at a watermelon, you want one that is dull. This is not particularly glossy, at least where it wasn't wet, because it should be fully ripe. An unripe watermelon is going to be very, very shiny. That's because it's still developing its rind. Its waxy sheen is not done yet. The big thing to look out for, however, is the field spot. Like I said on the cantaloupe, this is where the melon was sitting on the ground, and the color of the field spot tells you a big story. Usually the field spot on a watermelon is going to darken with age. And so the best quality ones are going to be gold to orange in color. White to cream colored watermelons typically have not been able to sit out as long and may not have had mature flavor. The other thing you want to look out for is for its size, it should be quite heavy. So if you want to give this one a bit of a heft.
I'm just kidding.
Not quite that heavy, as it is a smaller watermelon compared to some others. But another thing you might notice on the surface here, notice all of the scratches and all of the damage on the outside. Typically, this webbing on a watermelon is formed during the pollination process and would indicate a fully pollinated watermelon. Now, there are some folks who talk about check the width of the green stripes, that it may be 2 finger widths across. However, this isn't actually a reliable method at all. The reason being is because commercial watermelons tend to be 6 to 8 different varieties a year. The stripe pattern is simply going to vary based on what variety you have. You may notice watermelons at the supermarket that are very light green with very distinct dark stripes, or a darker watermelon that has very indistinct striping for the majority of the skin. These are simply 2 different varieties of watermelon, and it's not a reliable way to tell. And the last one, and this one goes out to all of us who are usually tire kickers, is the knock test. So on a watermelon, the knock test doesn't necessarily indicate brightness, but it does indicate that it is full of water. Typically, when I have a watermelon like this one, I want the sound to reverberate all the way through when I give it a nice firm tap. So when you tap the watermelon, you should hear it go all the way through and out the bottom. And this one has a nice hollow sound, which means it's full of water. Hopefully, this one is going to be an absolutely delicious summer treat.
We'll test that out shortly.
While this produce item is certainly not native and certainly not grown in North Carolina, a summer barbecue may be incomplete without the humble pineapple. This member of the bromeliad family has gotten really popular across the world and comes in a variety of colors. However, choosing a good pineapple is very important. If you choose one that is like this green one here, this one's not ready yet. It's not a bad pineapple. It simply means you may need to wait upwards of a week to a week and a half to really have it at its best. This does not work if you need to get it on the grill this afternoon. So, when selecting a pineapple, what you want it to be is nice and yellow. Typically, most commercial varieties of pineapple are going to be a yellow-fleshed variety. Because of this, that color translates to the outer skin. You want one that is going to be an even yellow color all the way across. And, if you're lucky, it's going to have a sweet fragrance as well. This one, even though it's full of yellow, could still go a little bit longer. I'd give it between 3 and 5 days to be at its peak. That way, it'll be nice, sweet and juicy for whatever you use it for. Another tropical friend that is typically added to the summer kitchen is the humble avocado.
Those are my favorite.
Highly nutritious, full of fiber and healthy fats, it's important to pick an avocado at the right stage of ripeness for what you need it for. This green avocado in my right hand is very underripe. In fact, Haley, what would you compare that to?
A rock.
A rock. It is a rock-hard green avocado. Now, that doesn't mean that this is not a good avocado. It simply means that you'll need to give it some more time. In fact, if you don't plan on using it straight away, I actually recommend picking some of the hard ones because they can ripen further on your counter. You do not want an avocado that is too soft if you plan on simply slicing it. However, for all of those who love to make guacamole and a few other dishes, this avocado here is very much a ripe one. Not only is it a completely different color from our underripe friend over there, but the texture is different as well. Much like the tomato, you want to aim for one that has an even amount of give when you put down your thumb. So I should be able to push my thumb anywhere on the avocado, and I should be able to feel it give in. This one will be perfect for anything that's going to involve mashing and breaking it into smaller pieces. It'll have a creamier texture and might be slightly sweeter than the one that isn't fully ripe yet. The one that isn't fully ripe yet will typically have a bit of a grassy flavor involved, and that's usually quite fresh and also very nice.
Awesome.
And finally, it would not be a Carolina summer without fresh peaches. Now, the two peaches I have in my hand, this one comes from the grocery store. This one comes from our Sandhills Research Station in Montgomery County. The difference between these two is, well, everything. This grocery store peach is ripe, and typically to pick a ripe peach, you want to make sure that it has this blush. The blush on a peach comes from wherever the sunlight was able to sit on the peach's skin while it was still attached to the tree. This one is still fully ripe. However, even though it is, it's not going to be nearly as good as this peach here. They're two different varieties. Typically, ones from your supermarket are going to be bred for shipping. Keeps it from bruising, keeps it from getting too ugly. I wouldn't be able to ship this peach in a box. I have to pick it right off the tree, maybe put it in a bag or a bucket, and get it used within the week, because peaches have a very short shelf life. This peach is red all over, which indicates it's fully ripe. And the biggest thing that I like to tell for how good a quality peach is the smell. So Haley, if you could compare these for me.
Surely. Let's start with the not as good peach. It's got a very light scent, whereas this one has a much sweeter, more vibrant scent. So it's a lot stronger of a smell from the fresher peach.
That's going to be one of your best indicators for quality. And the other thing too, this peach, nearly rock hard. This peach is not fully ready to be eaten yet, and in fact, I would let this sit on my counter for upwards of a week before it's actually ready to consume. The other thing about peaches is that although not everyone dislikes the skin, I still highly recommend its removal due to the fact that significant use of both fungicides and insecticides are required for peach cultivation in our state. This peach here, because it's fully ripe, again, gives into my touch. This peach, I could eat this right now and it'll be all over my chin and probably down the front of my shirt. However, I typically prefer to peel these and slice them up and use them for cobblers and other dishes. Peaches are truly the best summer produce in the Carolinas, and they have the shortest season. Right now we are in the peak of things, however, peaches will be done by the third week of August most typically. So, get out to your local farmer's market if you can, get yourself a fresh bag of peaches, and enjoy the summer sunshine. Good
Thank
cut.
you so much for that, Andrew. I feel like I have learned so much about picking some better produce, especially the things that I don't tend to buy as frequently just because of discomfort. And I feel like that's where a lot of people tend to buy things over and over. They're not as confident in not only cooking with certain foods, but just picking them in general. What are they supposed to look like? What are they supposed to feel like? Are they supposed to have a smell? I mean, just from the melons, like you said, the cantaloupe, we're not really focused on the smell, but with the honeydew, you can utilize that smell as a method of choosing. So I think that is wonderful. So yeah.
And oftentimes when it comes to things like this, if you choose a variety that isn't quite ready yet, it's not at its peak, it's not going to be a good experience, and oftentimes that can lead to people disliking things unfairly. So typically I recommend give produce their best foot forward and try to get them at their best. You may find that you like something that you typically wouldn't purchase and certainly wouldn't eat. Some of our 4-Hers certainly hadn't had a fresh peach until I took them out to the research station, and now I've made peach lovers out of every single one of them. They'll be going for peaches probably for the rest of their life, and I'm happy I could introduce them to proper quality summer produce.
I love that. All right, well, now that we've talked about how to pick some of the best produce that's in season right now, we're going to dive into a couple of recipes. And Andrew has started some raised beds here at the Extension office. And one of the things he's been harvesting recently is some cucumbers. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the cucumbers you've been growing?
Sure. So cucumbers are typically divided into 2 categories, and this is based off of what they are used for. The 2 categories are slicing cucumbers and pickling cucumbers. As their name implies, a slicing cucumber is typically the variety that you're going to use for fresh eating and salads, whereas pickling cucumbers tend to do better once they are canned in vinegar. The biggest difference between the two is that a slicing cucumber tends to have a higher water content for its size, while pickling cucumbers tend to be a little drier. The drier cucumbers tend to absorb vinegar a bit better and so produce a better quality pickle. This being said, you can use both for most applications and they're quite flexible. There's no hard and fast rules when it comes to cucumbers, but if you choose the right variety for what you're doing, you tend to have better results. In my case, my raised beds do not have room for significant supports, and so I am growing what are called bush cucumbers. This simply is a vining plant that does not reach 6 to 8 feet long like their standard sized counterparts, and so they're a bit more suitable for confined spaces, such as my raised beds.
Yeah, I love that he said that they're flexible, because actually the ones we're going to be working with today are not very flexible because he has been soaking them in a food grade lime solution. And you can use lime, you can use an ice bath. We even have something called Pickle Crisp that you can buy from the store. And all these methods help us to get that crisp pickle that we desire. And so since we're making some pickles today, we do want them to be extra crisp and crunchy. So yeah.
Sure do.
You want to dive into this and grab those spears?
Sure, let me go ahead and get the spears from the fridge.
Cool.
So the spears that we've prepared today have been soaking in lime water, which is actually a compound using a salt of calcium hydroxide. This salt should be fully rinsed off of your cucumbers before preparation, however, as if you mix calcium hydroxide with the vinegar, all you'll end up doing is neutralizing the acid you're trying to pickle with, and so you are at risk of botulism. Food safety is extremely important here at the Extension office.
Yes, it is. And today we're going to be doing quick pickles, quick refrigerator pickles. And you can be a little bit more flexible with what you add to your refrigerator pickles. But if you are making canned pickles, you will want to find an evidence-based recipe that you are following exactly.
The cucumbers we're using today did come from the garden. However, they did get a bit overgrown. And this is the biggest warning I have to anyone who is new to growing cucumbers. Watch them very carefully. There will be some that you will miss, and if they get oversized, you can still eat them as long as they have not turned yellow. If you have an oversized yellow cucumber, save it for seeds. If you attempt to eat it, it will make you very sick, as a yellow cucumber is poisonous. However, the ones we have today, on the other hand, they got a bit oversized due to our excess rain lately. However, they were a bit bitter. I did have to core them and take the skins off, but other than that, they should still make delicious crunchy pickles. The spears are peeled and they are fully ready. Because of that lime water, they have no bend to them whatsoever, so they should be excellent and extra crunchy.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and add what we want. And again, you can get creative with what flavors you want to add into your pickles. If you want to omit garlic, you can. Andrew and I both love garlic, so we will be adding that in. We will also be adding in some dill today. We have celery seed, mustard seed. If you like spice, you can add in some hot pepper flakes. You can add in some hot peppers. So yeah, there's lots of different options and creativity you can have with your pickles. So let's do this. I'm gonna give you a jar.
All right.
Also, what I've already done here is I've created my brine. Your brine is gonna consist of 50% water to 50% vinegar. You can use a white vinegar or an apple cider vinegar. It's just completely up to you. We're using a white vinegar today. And then you add a few tablespoons of your pickling salt. You want to use pickling salt over your regular table salt because this is specifically for canning purposes so that you can have that nice clear brine. Otherwise, if you use regular table salt, you're going to have a cloudy brine. It's still going to taste good. It's just not going to be as visually appealing, right? Okay, so we're going to add in our spices first to our jar. I'm going to give you some mustard seed.
All right.
And I'll get some celery seed. Again, there's no right or wrong as far as how much you add to it. It's just personal preference.
Oh, let me get it.
The hard part's getting it open.
It is. There we go.
So I'm probably just gonna start with like a half of a teaspoon of this. Okay, I'll let you use that, get yours.
All right.
And I want some mustard seed too.
Absolutely.
I like all the flavor. Something else you can do if you don't want them, kind of freestanding in there, is that you can put these in a spice bag and you can let them soak in the brine so the flavor distributes in your brine, and then you won't actually have the seeds and such in your jar. But again, that's just personal preference.
And now pickles are very flexible too on flavoring, aren't they?
Absolutely, yes. You can definitely have a little bit of fun with it.
I'll hand this back to you.
Okay. All right, and then I'm gonna hook us both up. How much garlic would you like? You wanna split this big one?
Sure, let's split that big clove.
We have this huge clove, so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna put a little bit of pressure on it. Ooh, it's hard to even get to open. I'm going to peel that top layer off. I might actually just cut into it. That might help. And let Andrew peel off that outer layer.
Typically garlic cloves are going to be significantly smaller than this, but I happen to have a knack for choosing extra large garlic, and I think it went a little bit too well this time. So we ended up with these absolutely massive 1 ounce cloves. That is much larger than average. Typically, you'll use 2 or 3 smaller ones in its place, but because this is so large, we only need the one.
Yeah, so we're just gonna add that in. Again, this is not required. This is totally optional, so if you're not big on garlic like we are, you can leave that right out. Okay, is there anything else you wanted to add to yours, Andrew, or are you good with that?
Well, we need dill for dill
We
pickles,
do
don't
need
we?
dill. Good call. So here I'm gonna give you some dill.
And now dill is a very difficult herb to grow here in the Carolinas. It is very, very sensitive to the high temperatures we've been having. Do not despair if you can't grow it at home. It's part of the struggles of living in the South. However, those of us who are successful with it, share us your secret. In this case, though, we had to purchase some dill because it is out of season. Typically, I grow this during the spring. Now, how much should we add to have a proper dill pickle?
I would add at least a couple sprigs, more if you like that dill flavor. I'm planning
right.
on probably putting, and again, it depends on how big your sprigs are, but at least a few. I'll probably add a couple more because I love some dill.
And there is plenty of flavor to be had in the stems of the sprig, so do not worry if you put the whole thing into the jar. This entire part of the plant has that delightful fresh flavor we're looking for. Waste nothing if you can.
Okay, so we've got all our flavoring in there.
Now that we've got all the dill crammed into the jar, what's the next step?
Now we're gonna add in our cukes. And so you want them to fit nicely in there. For this recipe, we actually want about 1/2 inch of head space, which means that's just the space from the top of the jar to where the food or the liquid meets. So some of these, since they were a little bit bigger, we might end up having to cut them in half, but if we don't, that one, for example, fits in there perfectly. But you can kind of lay it on its side so that you can stack as many in as possible because we don't want to waste any space. See, I'm going to kind of shorten that. But yeah, that's what we're going to do. So go ahead and join me.
And since they had that lime soak, they really have that snap and crunch. The final texture is going to be perfect for what we're looking for. And the best part about this is that these cucumbers might have been tossed out if they weren't prepared to be used for something like this. It's very important that if you're going to go through the effort of growing summer produce, try to get the most mileage you can out of it. It's a lot of work. I would hate to see anyone's hard work go to waste.
Absolutely. And I love variety. So I like making things in different ways.
Oops, sorry.
So I don't get bored.
So you don't get bored?
Yes.
There's never a boring day around here in the kitchen.
Good call. Yeah, just kind of push them around, making sure you're getting as many in there as possible. And the good thing about that lime too is that they're not going to mash up. So you're really able to push them in and move them around and get as much in as possible. If you have any little space at the top, you can use some of those little ones to kind of put at the top to utilize any of that space.
Those giant garlic cloves take up a decent amount of space in the jar.
They do, but it'll be worth it.
And another thing to note, the reason why we can make pickles at all with cucumbers is that cucumbers are about 95 to 98% water by volume. They're hollow, so they're comprised of very big cells all the way across. The nice thing about that is that means we can change their flavor with relative ease compared to some other summer vegetables.
It's also important for pickles to get the most in there that you get the wide mouth jars versus the regular mouth jars. So keep that in mind too when you're making your pickles. All right, and then we have our jar funnels, and this is just going to help us to get our brine in a little bit easier without making as big of a mess.
We really want them packed in there. Actually helps that some of our spears are some odd sizes. That means we can really pack them in at the best density.
Absolutely. We are putting this hot liquid on top. That's going to help to distribute those flavors really good too. All right.
Of course, before I put some in there, I've got to add just a little bit more to top this one off.
Okay.
It's got to top that little bit of head space up there because we want to fit as much pickle as we can in the jar. There will be no wasted flavors and no wasted cucumbers today.
No.
All right.
So that's it. And we literally are just going to add on our lid after you add the liquid in. Here's this for you.
All right.
And again, we're going to refrigerate these, so I would leave them in at least a full 24 hours to allow those cukes to absorb all that flavor from the brine and from our herbs and spices. And so we'll put them in the refrigerator, and in a day or two, they'll be ready to eat.
All right. And of course, we are not limited to just doing spears. If you have the ability to cut them into dimes and coins, you can. We just simply have them as spears because these were oversized cucumbers, and so that was really the best method we could use. May I have a lid?
Sure.
All right. And it's very important, these lids on your canning jars are a one-way street. Do not reuse them. The seal is good only one time. So we'll pop the ring on there.
Cool. And we're planning to make a lot more of these
All right.
after the show, right? So you want to move on to our final recipe?
Yes, so
Okay.
we may need to clear some space here to
I
actually
can help
get
you out
that
with
done.
that. All right, guys, we are moving on to our final recipe. We cleaned up a little bit and pulled out the ingredients we need for another tasty cucumber treat. So tell us what we have next.
All right, so this is a very simple creamy cucumber salad recipe, and it's a great way to add a little bit of protein to a typically refreshing summer treat. So before we got started, I already prepared the cucumbers. In this case, you want to use a slicing cucumber. They have a bit more of a crisp texture. However, to prepare these, cut them thin, remove the skins, and lightly salt them. You should then let them sit for approximately 1 hour. This is a process called weeping, and all it does is it pulls a little bit of extra water out. Otherwise, when we mix in all of our other ingredients, it might become a little bit soupy, and it's really not that pleasant of a texture. So, now that I've prepared these, I'll go over our ingredients today. The dressing is quite simple. The main ingredient is Greek yogurt, for which we will be using 1/4 cup. If you could get that for me,
Sure.
while I go over the rest of these. Our other liquid ingredients include 2 tablespoons of red wine vinegar, 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, 1/2 tablespoon of garlic powder, 1 tablespoon of dehydrated dill. You can substitute for fresh. Typically, I'd recommend 1 whole package, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and 1 whole teaspoon of crushed black pepper. You can crack it fresh or get pre-ground. In this case, we have pre-ground today.
Okay.
So we'll first start by adding our Greek yogurt and our liquid ingredients. Now, Greek yogurt, I recommend using the whole milk version instead of the lighter ones, as it tends to have a better texture and the flavors will be able to settle a little bit more. That's the lovely part about using one that has the full fat content. It has a bit more flexibility. And since it only uses 1/4 cup for this entire dish, the calories should be relatively negligible on the whole thing. Of course, if you eat the entire salad in one go, it is known to happen. It is very good. You'll be all right too. So then I'll make sure and I'll add our red wine vinegar and our lemon juice. Now that I have all my liquid ingredients together, I'm going to stir to combine. And a very important part about this salad is to make sure that you actually let it sit to marinate for a little bit of time. So typically I recommend once everything is together, let it sit for at least an hour in the refrigerator. This way, a lot of the dehydrated ingredients are going to get rehydrated and their flavors are going to come out. And the cucumbers will get a chance to absorb some of that vinegar and some of those spices. So now that we're all together and we're nice and blended, as you can see, you don't want any visible lumps of yogurt. You want this to be fully mixed. We'll then add our dry ingredients, starting with the dill. Dry dill can be a little difficult to work with. It's very light, it's kind of dusty. And so I typically recommend adding it and mixing it in fully before adding anything else.
Now, do you prefer the dry over the fresh, or is this just a different way of using dill, or what are your thoughts?
My personal thoughts on it are use what you have access to. Dry dill is typically more convenient and easier to find, and most importantly, it's shelf stable. Shelf stable ingredients are never to be frowned upon, although it is less flavorful than its fresh counterpart. So now that it's fully blended, it should look somewhat like this, evenly distributed. And so we'll add the last of our dry ingredients. The one that actually benefits the most from sitting is the garlic powder. Garlic powder is simply dehydrated garlic that's been put through a spice mill. Because of this, it actually reaches its peak flavor after it's had time to rehydrate. One of the biggest mistakes you can use with garlic powder is by putting in a large amount at the beginning of a cook and then forgetting to taste it before adding some more. Oftentimes you will have to wait at least 10 minutes for it to truly come out. And now that that's fully blended in, I'm going to add our salt and pepper. Now these two are added to taste. I do recommend starting with the half teaspoon and the full teaspoon. Add more as you see fit. Typically, this is not supposed to be a particularly salty salad. This just adds a little bit of flavor in the background. The other thing is if you make this too salty, it will also get soupy in texture because that salt is going to pull water out of your cucumbers as they are very high in water. And so, once it is complete, it should be fully combined like this. And I'm going to put this in the fridge for about 1 hour. So cover and chill. And enjoy. It's a very easy salad to make. You get a little bit of protein and some healthy fats. And as a bonus, it is a fresh summer treat. It really does taste like a bright sunny day.
I can confirm that because we enjoyed some yesterday. Very good. Well, thank you, Andrew, for sharing your expertise with us today. I look forward to trying this recipe again in a little while and digging into our cucumbers. We may or may not share with our coworkers. We'll see about that. But thank you so much for tuning in. And if you need any information on growing, harvesting, if you're trying to start a new garden or raised bed, Andrew is definitely your guy. Feel free to give us a call at the extension office and we'd love to help you out. And if there are other things that you would like to learn on the show, let us know and we'll bring Andrew back for more. All right? Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. We'll see you next time.